Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me again this evening. This evening really comes from a question that came up the last time I was doing a live stream. Someone had mentioned about maybe talking about the window of tolerance, what happens when we're coming out of it, when we're in that like hyperarousal state. These are things I will be discussing in the evening. So I do hope you find this interesting. The window of tolerance. Tonight I'm going to be looking at what it is, what happens when we come out of that window of tolerance, the typical responses, the things we might experience, and also looking at different ways to maybe help improve it and even help maybe manage a little bit better if we find ourselves outside of our window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance, it's a concept that's used to describe our state of, if you will, optimal arousal, where we can start this sentence again. It's getting away from me. You can tell I haven't had enough coffee today. The window of tolerance is a concept where a person can work to their optimal advantage, if you will, to their skill set and so on, and manage stressors, emotions, different things like that, and they can do it at their most effective. Now, and it's going to change in different situations and with different people. There are times we're going to be very attentive, we're going to be paying attention. For instance, like if we're at work, we might have a big project on, so there's going to be a lot of attention paid there. We're still within our window of tolerance. There's going to be times when it's like we're doing things on autopilot. So we're not really paying much attention, but we're so familiar with it, we can be doing whatever those tasks are. We're still within our window of tolerance. What we're doing is we're managing at our most effective level. We can process and we can cope with the different stressors, the different things that are going on with us. And we can do it without becoming overwhelmed, without becoming too stressed. Okay. So it's the range of emotional and physiological states. I really need to start this again. My words are going all over the place. It's the range of our emotional and our physiological states within we're able to function. We're able to function effectively. And we can regulate what we're thinking, what we're feeling, because we might feel angry, we might feel anxious, we might feel stressed, we might feel a lot of different things. But we're able to cope, we're able to manage. We can regulate, we can ground ourselves, we can think of the best course of action as opposed to the most expedient or the quickest route out. We can think clearly, we can be adaptive, we can overcome, we can improvise. And we're working, if you will, within this window. The level of alertness that we have, as I said a moment ago, there'll be different levels of attention and so on, but the levels of alertness can vary in different situations. Sometimes we might find ourselves that is incredibly stressful. We know that it's incredibly stressful, but we know it's only going to be for a short burst. For instance, I'll stick with the work example. We might have a huge project on. It's all hands on deck. We have to really, really, get through whatever it is. It could be a busy lunchtime. It could be, a project that has to be finished by 5. So that's going to bring up a lot of pressure, but we're able to function because we know that it's only for a short space of time. It's going to finish come 5 o'clock or the end of the lunch break or whatever it happens to be. So in those heightened states, we can still function quite well, knowing that it's a short burst. It's going to diminish after a while. But then there are other times we could have several things going on at once, and they might not be big things, but they could be a lot of different things. Things that we could maybe normally cope with, but there are so many of them. We don't know where to start. We could feel overwhelmed. We don't know where to begin. It feels like there's going to be no end to it. So, if you will, that window starts to diminish a bit. It starts to decrease. And within our window of tolerance, even if something is really, really stressful, frightening, whatever it happens to be, we still feel reasonably safe. We feel able to cope. We might not have to cope with it ourselves. There could be other people there. There could be people to support us. There could be people doing their part as well. We're only maybe playing one small part. But what we can do, as I say, our cognitive functioning is working quite well. We can be adaptive. We can improvise, we can overcome. Sound like a Marine here, but you know what I mean? We can do what we need to do to get through whatever it is. Being within that zone allows for our, as they say, our optimal functioning. We have effective stress responses. And these effective stress responses don't lead to things like hyperarousal. We don't start to feel hypervigilant. We don't start to panic because, again, we know we can manage. There is the emotional regulation. Something might anger us, but we don't lose our temper. We can recognize what that anger is. We could think of the best course of action. We could think of a way of communicating something in order to improve something, to fix something. We might feel anxious, but we recognize it's a normal level of anxiety. It could be perhaps a job interview. So we know that that's going to bring a level of anxiety. We can maybe manage that. We have different little techniques that we can learn. There's the clear thinking. There's the decision making. Again, we're thinking of the best course of action as opposed to the most expedient. We could be thinking of, if you remember previous live streams, I went through solution finding questions. We could be thinking of, what's the best way to change this? Is this mine to change in the first place? What would change look like? How would it feel? Can I just accept this, even if I'm just accepting it for now, until I'm able to change it? We could be thinking, can I just leave it alone? Is it really that big a deal? Does it need prioritized at the moment? So we can have clear thinking, good decision-making skills within that window of tolerance. Also, we can have healthy relationships and interactions with others, because we might feel stressed by a relationship, by work, by a project we have to do, by an exam we have coming up. But we can still engage well in our interactions with others. We're not taking it out on them. We're not running around in a panic. We're not hoping people rescue us or whatever. So we can have healthy relationships even when we're under some kind of a strain. We can still do our normal day-to-day tasks. We get up, we brush our teeth, we go to work, we do whatever it is. We're still managing effectively. Now, thing is, whenever things begin to happen, things go on, we're coming out of that window of tolerance. And this can be for different reasons. There could be different things going on. But whenever things happen and we start to come out of it, the normal ways we cope maybe stop working. Maybe they're not as effective. Maybe they're not appropriate to whatever the situation is. Now, these things could be things like traumatic experiences. There could be overwhelming stress. There could be chronic pain, chronic illnesses, chronic anxiety. There could be sudden surges of emotions. Again, we're feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes these things can happen in short bursts. Other times it might be like an ongoing thing. Like I used the word a moment ago, being chronic pain, chronic anxiety and things like that. So it feels like it's ongoing. So there can be varying levels there as well. But whenever people come out of that window of tolerance, that's whenever they start to feel a lot more stress and they start to struggle to regulate their emotions. There can be difficulty managing their thoughts, their behaviors. There could be a lot of avoidance. There could be things like, again, the most expedient route as opposed to the most effective. When we come out of that window of tolerance, if you think of it like a level, we either come out up here or down here, because there's two ways we come out of it. So if we're coming out up here, we go into a state of what's known as hyperarousal. If we come out down here, it's what's known as hypoarousal. Okay, and I'm going to explain the differences. With hyperarousal, that's whenever we find ourselves maybe becoming irritable. We become angry. We lose our temper at the shortest things. We can snap at the people around us. We can be aggressive. We can become aggressive. We can become hypersensitive to various triggers. The things that bring up these stressors in us. Some people might experience panic attacks, anxiety attacks, feeling sudden intense periods of fear, discomfort, things like that, uncertainty. People can go into a state of hypervigilance. They're already in a state of arousal, but they're looking for other things that could happen, other things that could go wrong, other things that could cause even more distress. So they're in this state of, as I say, vigilance, trying to keep themselves safe. There can be difficulties with concentration. They often say, it's difficult to, think about two or three things at once. A lot of time there's things racing around in our head. I often think, I've used the expression before, We have a head like a TARDIS. It's so much bigger on the inside. There's so many things firing off, bouncing off each other, and we're thinking of the worst case scenario. We're thinking of what could possibly go wrong. We're thinking of all the terrible things. We're thinking of things that haven't even happened yet. And when that happens, when we're in that state of hyper arousal, we feel physical things as well. I said a moment ago, panic attacks, but we feel physical things as well, in the sense that, we have an increased heart rate. Our heart rate starts to speed up. Our breathing becomes more rapid. We start to shallow breathe. We're breathing from our chest rather than our diaphragm. We can feel anxious, agitated, constantly on edge. We can be panicky. There is a lot more to it than that, but that's just to summarize the hyperarousal. But when we're in that state, again, it can be very difficult to function, because a lot of the time, what we're thinking of is either the quickest way out of it, the best way to manage it, the easiest way to manage it. We're thinking of things like that. We're not necessarily thinking clearly. Our normal ways of coping aren't necessarily working. When we come out of our window of tolerance and we go out the other side, if you will, we come out in what's known as hypoarousal. Now, that's whenever we can feel like a lethargy. We can feel like emotionally disconnected. We could feel numb. We could feel tired, fatigued. We can experience dissociation. And that's like a sense of a disconnection from reality, sometimes even from our own body. We can feel detached. Again, feeling disconnected from our own thoughts, our own feelings, even our own surroundings. We might shut down. We might withdraw from others socially. We might stop reaching out for help. We might stop mixing with people. We might stop interacting with them. Again, we might just want to go and lie down in a darkened room. We need some kind of rest. Now, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. Sometimes we do need a bit of space. We do need a bit of rest. Not necessarily in the long term. It's not really a good coping strategy in the long term. Whenever we withdraw from others, sometimes we find it hard to get back into their company. We find it more difficult to engage with others. It just becomes quite an unhealthy coping mechanism. Physically, we might feel a slower heart rate. Our breathing might slow down. We might even feel a lack of physical sensation. If you will, when we come out in the hypoarousal state, it's almost like we begin to shut down. Now, we might still function, but we might find it more difficult even just to do the things that we normally do, our day-to-day things. We will go into a low mood. The things that we normally do, the things we enjoy doing, even the things we have to do, it's almost like they're too much effort. Even brushing our teeth in the morning or whatever, things can feel as if they're too much. Just like if we come out the other side, the hyperarousal, the things we normally do, again, it feels like they're not appropriate to the moment. I shouldn't be doing that because I should be panicking on this. So again, either way, we're not necessarily functioning at our normal level when we're within that. Now, when it comes to the things that can bring us out of our window of tolerance, it is important to note that everybody's different, in the sense that what bothers me, what really upsets me, what will bring me out of my window might not necessarily be even on your radar. It might not be that big a deal to you. So it is going to vary from person to person. We all have different, if you will, support networks. We all have different ways of coping with different things. Some people may have learned to cope with a certain thing, other people haven't. So again, it's important to remember there are different things. But some of the things that can bring people out of that window of tolerance, I'm just going to name just a few. But first of all, there could be traumatic events. Now, this could be some kind of overwhelming experience. It could be something life-threatening. It could be like a car accident or something. There could be emotional abuse. There could be natural disasters taking place. These things can push people out of their window of tolerance, because these things are going to have a lasting effect on some level. But our ability to regulate emotions is going to suffer. We're going to be thinking in terms of safety. We're going to be thinking, and the things that I normally do aren't working. They're not going to work. Again, we can be panicking, especially if it's like a near-death experience, let's say like a car accident. It's almost like we're stuck there, where we can feel as if we're, reliving it. We start to worry about the what ifs, but what if this had happened? What if that happened? Another thing that can bring us out of our window of tolerance is chronic stress, ongoing stress. The stress never ends. It's like one damn thing after another. Now, prolonged exposure to stressful situations. Now, this could be an ongoing conflict with someone. It could be financial strain. It could be work related. Different kinds of responsibilities that bring up stressors in us, but it's like there's no end to it. It either keeps on going or at times it seems to get worse. Our ability to be able to cope under those situations starts to diminish. Again, the things we normally do maybe stop working. There can also be emotional triggers. I talked about this in the previous live stream, different kinds of triggers, about being able to recognize your triggers. Sometimes we don't necessarily understand our triggers. We don't really know what they are. But a trigger is an external thing, and it's a sensory thing, sight, sound, touch, smell, that sort of thing. Somebody says something, we see something, we hear something, we smell something. And what that brings up is like an emotional memory. It's the memory of how something felt. We know how it feels to be anxious. We know how it feels to be frightened. These triggers bring up those memories, these emotional memories. And sometimes those triggers can have us feel as if the threat from yesterday is present today. We're right back there. And those triggers from past traumas, conflicts, relationship problems, things like that, they can be brought on by even just things like sudden changes, being caught unawares and so on. But these can provoke strong emotional responses. And what we often do is we find ourselves acting as if we were right back in that situation. We can feel every bit as helpless. And what we're trying to avoid is we're trying to avoid that situation. We're trying to avoid that feeling again. So our different triggers can bring us out of our window of tolerance. There can be environmental factors going on. We could be in chaotic environments. We could experience sensory overload. Trying to think of something. Yeah, like being at a concert. I like live music. I like going to don't go to many, but I do like going to concerts. But the thing I don't like about concerts are other people. I don't like crowds. I'm not a good person in a crowd. And sometimes I can find it hard to listen to the music when there's a load of people around me and they're all jumping around, cheering, things like that. So there can be environmental things that go on. Loud noises, bright lights, crowds, things like that. The things that overwhelm our nervous system, okay? The things in our environment that overwhelm our nervous system can bring us out of our window of tolerance. There can be physical health things going on. For instance, there could be chronic pain, it could be an injury, there could be an illness, it could be something that's ongoing. These things can contribute to the stress of sometimes being able to just manage. How am I going to be able to get back to work? How am I going to be able to work? How am I going to be able to pay my rent, my mortgage, whatever it happens to be? Managing some kind of chronic condition, trying to find a way to mitigate the flare-ups and things like that. These things can bring us out of our window of tolerance because, again, we only have so much capacity. We can only deal with so much. The last thing I would say, the things that can bring us out of our window of tolerance, I think sometimes it can just be a lack of resources, a lack of support. Because already we're going through difficult things, we're going through problems, we're going through whatever it happens to be, but we can feel as if we have no one to turn to. Or the people we do turn to, maybe they can't help us, maybe they won't help us, whatever it is. And that can lead us to feel isolated. That can lead us to feel, whatever it is, I'm not enough. I'm not going to be able to manage this. That can make the stress even more intense, believing that what we're going through is bad enough, but what we're going through, we have to go through it alone. That can make it more difficult to stay within our window of tolerance. That fear of or not having enough resources or enough support to deal with things. And as our window of tolerance starts to decrease because of these things, we feel more and more overwhelmed. We feel less and less able to manage. Now, as I say, it could be one big thing that's really, really bringing us out of it, but it's that on top of everything else. Or it can be a series of a lot of other things. You pick one of them in isolation. It might be a hassle, it might be grief, but you probably could manage it. You add that to maybe a dozen other things, and it starts to feel more and more and more. We feel as if we have less control. Now, there are ways to, some people might say, grow your window of tolerance. Some people might say improve your capacity. There are different ways of phrasing it, but I think some ways that can be helpful are to first of all recognize when you are coming out of it. You start to recognize different symptoms. As I said earlier, some of the things we're looking at, the rapid heart rate, things like that, panic attacks, the hypervigilance, feeling detached, starting to shut down. That could be a sign that maybe we're being overwhelmed. That could be a sign that maybe we need to rest somehow. That could be a sign that maybe we need to reach out for some kind of support. That could be a sign that maybe we need to change our approach somehow. So we start to maybe recognize those signs. Another thing, and I know I keep saying this, I say this pretty much every live stream I do, sometimes counseling can be a good place to start, because we can recognize what is within our window of tolerance. We can recognize the things we can manage, maybe the things we can't. We can recognize, again, it depends on the approach you go to, or you go for. Sometimes with CBT, you're learning to maybe manage things a bit differently. You're learning to look at your belief system, what's yours, what isn't, things like that. With a solution-focused approach, you're looking more at your skill sets. So one of the things I like about solution-focused work whenever I practice it sometimes, it's not just about looking at the difficulties. It's not just looking at the problems. It's taking as much time, if not more, to explore options, choices, supports, alternatives, things like that. Human beings, I think, are inherently much more resourceful than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. So counseling can be a good place to start, to look at ways to help with our window of tolerance. Also to recognize when we do come out of our window of tolerance, because sometimes there are things going on that absolutely would bring anybody out of it. But even when we are out of it, finding healthier ways to cope and manage. So some ideas to help stay within your window or to increase it, whatever term you want to use. First thing I'd say is, if you look back at, I don't know if you've watched all of them up until now, I do know I have people, I'll be going through questions earlier, and it's really nice when I sometimes see familiar names and so on. Pardon me. It's nice to have new people as well, by the way. You're more than welcome, and I hope you find this helpful. I'm glad to have you here. But if you look back at previous live streams, there have been stuff I've talked about in the past, things like recognizing and managing anger, not just your own, but sometimes other people's, the things that fuel anger. Looking at solution finding questions. Again, can I change it? Can I accept it? Can I let it go? Looking through some of those kinds of questions. I looked at cognitive reframing, for instance, the ABC model, ways to challenge our unhelpful beliefs, thinking habits, behaviors, and so on. Looking at ways to manage boundaries, ways to ground ourselves, ways to have difficult conversations, for want of a better term. Yeah, some of the live streams I've done, in fact, many of the live streams, if you look at those, there's information in those that can help people stay within their window of tolerance, can also help people if they find themselves coming out of their window of tolerance, ways to maybe ground themselves, to think through what is the best course of action, not necessarily what is the easiest course of action. But what I would say, again, staying within the window of tolerance, I'm going to talk through some ideas that might help you with that. But what I am going to say is, and this is where counseling can make it easier, it does involve learning to recognize your stressors, recognize your triggers, recognize when we are being overwhelmed, learning how to regulate our emotions, our feelings, and even our behaviors. and trying to stay balanced within all of this. So some of the ideas that might help would be, first of all, as I talked about this, I think it was in the last live stream, practicing a little bit of self-awareness, sometimes a little bit of mindfulness. We can recognize the early stages of stress. We can recognize the early stages of anger. When we recognize it early on, and we can maybe do something about it or something constructive with it, that can stop things escalating. That can stop us becoming overwhelmed. The other thing we can do whenever we do that, again, we can have a lot of different things going on. So what we can learn to do is prioritize. Some things may be very important. Absolutely. It's not for me or anyone else to say they're not. We don't have the right to do that. Only you can discern that. But we can prioritize because it may be important, but it's not necessarily something that needs our attention right now, because maybe something else does. So we can start to prioritize. We can even start to think of little small steps that might help us resolve something. We could be in a very difficult ongoing situation. And if we're putting all of our resources into just functioning, into just managing, what we're not necessarily thinking of is a way to resolve it. We're not necessarily thinking of a way through it, not always a way out of it, but maybe a way through it. We're not necessarily thinking of ways to make it easier, not easy, but sometimes easier. When we're a little bit more grounded, whenever we can think like that, we can think differently about things. And we can also think, by the way, we can think honestly with ourselves. Is this necessarily good for me? Should I be in this position? So we can start to think like that as well. We can look at stress management techniques. They can sometimes help with our window of tolerance. We can look at ways, as I said a moment ago about grounding, but we can look at also things like muscle relaxation, things like meditation. We can look at guided imagery, the different things that can help us reduce stress, not take it away, but maybe dilute it enough to enable us to be able to continue functioning. We can change our lifestyle habits. We can look at our sleep pattern. Are we getting enough sleep? Or the sleep we're getting, do we feel rested? Do we, some people might get 8-9 hours, but they wake up the next day and they feel just as tired. So it's not that refreshing. Other people might get away with 4 or 5 hours sleep, but they do feel quite refreshed. So it's looking at different ways to maybe look at our sleeping habits, things we can do to maybe improve our sleep patterns. We can look at our diet. Today's self-disclosure. When I used to go through really, really bad periods of stress and things like that, I found myself eating a lot of junk. I would have eaten greasy food, fast food. I would have been eating chocolate, things like that. It was just a lot of comfort. And if you'd have seen me, it was about 4 times the size I am now, if you'd have seen me back then. Looking at different things that can help, things like our diet, things like our sleep, things like exercise, self-care. If you have a pet, and I've got Freud downstairs, and one of the amazing things about Freud is whether I want to or not, I have to take him out for a walk every morning before I go to work, and then after tea when I come home at night, even when it's freezing cold and it's raining. That's not necessarily a bad thing. He's getting his exercise, so am I. I also have his company, which is pretty good. He doesn't talk much, but he's pretty good company. He's a good listener. He'd make a good therapist, I reckon. So the things like our self-care, our diet, our sleep, our exercise, even our other relationships, having healthy relationships with other people. Not necessarily people who are just going to agree with every word we say, but people who can challenge us, but they can do it in a very supportive way. People who can suggest alternatives, things like that. I mentioned this in a previous live stream as well about setting boundaries. I think boundaries are a really good, healthy thing to help us stay within that window of tolerance. Now, not just our personal boundaries, because yes, we can have personal boundaries. We don't want people taking our stuff without our permission, things like that. But also we have boundaries between things like work and home life, because we might have a very stressful job. I think it's very hard to find a job these days that isn't stressful. If anybody can think of one, please tell me. I will apply first thing in the morning. Um, Having healthy boundaries between work and home life. For instance, you might have a hobby. You might go and play sport. You might belong to a group, community group of some kind. You might, be into music or something, create music. You might, play football or whatever it happens to be. Something interesting and something that really engages you outside of work. Because as stressful as work is, it's remembering maybe come 5 o'clock, as stressful as it is, it'll still be there at 9 o'clock in the next morning. That evening, maybe you're going out with friends, maybe you're doing whatever it is, maybe you are, playing that football, or you're making that woodwork thing, or you're, whatever it is. Um, Healthy interests and relationships outside of work can help. So that's a good healthy boundary to have to help manage stress if it's like work related. If it's something like an exam, a course you're doing, there's going to be required a lot. There's a lot of, the grey cells being exercised, there's a lot of sacrifice you have to do, coursework and so on. But even having those little things like whatever it is, watching a movie with friends, again, could be listening to your favorite album, CD, whatever they're called these days. I was going to say record. um, Even just once in a while, even just maybe, an hour in the evening, whatever it is, there's a lot of demands on you if you're doing coursework because a lot is riding on it, but you still need to have a little bit of self-care. Interpersonal boundaries with others. Yeah, as I said earlier on, we don't want people taking our stuff, certainly not without our permission. We have our boundaries with other people. We do not necessarily want to be taken advantage of. We do not necessarily want to be exploited. We do not particularly want to be made fun of. We don't want to be, devalued and things like that. Having healthy boundaries, setting, establishing, maintaining those boundaries can be helpful in keeping us within our window of tolerance. Recognizing as well when we do feel overwhelmed, seeking support is a good positive thing. Again, that could be in therapy. Some people will find life coaching helpful because they want to learn or develop their skills. They want to learn new skills. They want to develop the ones they have. They want to set goals. How are they going to get there? It could be talking to friends. It could be talking to family. Not necessarily talking about it. Yeah, it's okay to talk about it as if you want to get it off your chest, but talking about it in a way that you're maybe open to hearing new information because someone else may have experienced the same kind, maybe not the same thing, but the same kind of thing that you have. And it might be interesting to hear from them what worked and what didn't. So reaching out to other people, seeking some kind of support, improving a support network. This is the thing about the 21st century. What I find really helpful, what I find really, really good. I know there is a downside to it, but one of the things the really positive things about it is if you think of things like social media, even YouTube like this, it can be really useful to either take part and join or be a part of some kind of support network where people talk about similar things, but not just talking about it as if it's all problems, but talking about, things that are helpful, things that aren't helpful, signposting people to maybe organizations or something that maybe we hadn't considered that could help us, having people to validate us, and being able to validate and support others. So there is something, not just about seeking support, I suppose, but being able to offer support. These things can really help us stay within our window of tolerance. Going back, I said a moment ago, things like the self-care, activities that promote joy, activities that promote relaxation, activities that we just get a lot out of, things that we enjoy. Mine is over my shoulder here. I collect old toys, vintage toys, but they're all toys that I really like, things I have some kind of a connection with. You see in the background there, I've got a TARDIS, I've got a Starship Enterprise, a Battlestar Galactica, I've got lots of different things, little figures too. Little things like that are self-care, the things that we enjoy, the things that we engage in, and they don't have to mean anything to other people. That's perfectly okay. When you do engage in something and other people enjoy it as well, it's good because there's that social connection as well. Developing coping strategies. Now, this is the thing about coping strategies. I mentioned this last time when I was talking about grounding, mindfulness, things like that. Coping strategies are not there to take it away. They're not there to make us feel 100% brilliant. Coping strategies are there to help us get through something. They're there to help us manage something a little bit easier. If you will, anxiety, stress, things like that, that can feel really, really intense. Sometimes we might think the coping strategy doesn't work because we still feel anxious, we still feel stressed. It's not there to take the stress and the anxiety away. It is there to dilute it, to take the edge off it. It's there to allow us to do what we need to do, maybe that little bit easier. Coping strategies, there are many, many different ones. Some people find them helpful. They can read about them online. They might listen to someone like me in one of the live streams. Their therapist might tell them, even their life coach, if that's what they're going to, might teach them. But some people find their own, and that's perfectly okay. A coping strategy isn't so helpful when it's maladaptive, in the sense that people do the same thing over and over again, expecting it to work in every situation. Sometimes we might employ the same coping strategy, but we might have to adapt it slightly. Sometimes we might try something else entirely. But coping strategies can be good. They can be really useful, as I say, to help dilute the intensity of a feeling in order to help us get through it just that little bit easier. Said earlier on, I mentioned one of the things that can bring us out of our window of tolerance is our triggers. Recognizing our triggers. Again, there is a live stream just came into my head. There was a live stream I did about recognizing our triggers and how to manage them. When we identify our personal triggers, because sometimes it is the same thing. Other times it might be the same recurring kind of theme. Not necessarily the same thing, but there might be a recurring theme. For instance, it could be loud noises. It could be being caught unawares. It could be a sudden change in plan. It could be any number of things. When we recognize the triggers, they become easier to navigate. The way I like to put it is, when you recognize a trigger, it becomes easier to diffuse. Okay. So the trigger doesn't necessarily go away, but it becomes easier to manage. What it brings up is a memory. We recognize it as a memory, and the memory can inform us, but not necessarily make the decision for us. Lastly, said it earlier on, reaching out for help and support, things like therapy, counseling, support groups, reaching out to others, life coaching, whatever it happens to be. Each of these little things can help us to, again, if you want to call it, improve our window of tolerance. It can help us manage it a little bit better. When we come out of it, we're state of that hyperarousal or even a state of that hypoarousal, we recognize what's going on with us, and we can think maybe a little bit more rationally. Even if we're not feeling it, we can think in a certain way. We can think about what is the best way to help myself. The way I like to phrase it is, what can I do that I might thank myself for later on? Even if I don't feel like it right now, what might I thank myself for later on? That could be saying no to that pizza, that kebab or whatever, because maybe it's the third one you've had that day. It could be something simple. It doesn't have to be magnanimous. You don't have to book yourself a week in a 5-star hotel somewhere. It could be just something small. What might I thank myself for later? It could be going for a walk. It could be taking the dog out. It could be calling round to a friend. It could be anything. You just find those little things. Now, that is the window of tolerance. I've talked about the hyperarousal. I've talked about the hypoarousal. Some of the things that can bring us out of it, that sends us into those states, but also some ideas to help manage it, even to, if you will, try to bring yourself back into it. Things like the prioritizing the self-care and things like that. So I'm pretty much out of breath after all that talking. It's the difficulty about doing live streams. I'm the one doing all the talking. It's so much easier when there's someone else. So what I'm going to do is what I often do. I'm going to go back and I'm going to have a look at some questions that might have come up. So, hello everybody, on my way. No backstitch. Hello Polly. Okay. Hello Noel, Sally, Karen, Right, let's have a look. The window of tolerance is a new term for me. Yes, the window of tolerance. It's normally it's associated with things like trauma therapy, trauma counseling, and so on. It's not really a term I would use. Sometimes I would use a bandwidth. I talk about a bandwidth. Um, if you think of a bandwidth, I think of it because again, I grew up pre-internet. I grew up in the analog age. Anybody that remembers, if you ever remember the old radios, you used to have like a bar along it with all the digits, and you just turn the knob, and the little red line would go up and down until you found a station. So if you will, you've got this whole frequency of stuff going on now. What I would talk about sometimes is when we operate within a bandwidth, a certain bandwidth. When we come out of that bandwidth, we start to experience different things. You come out on one side, again, you might be the hyperarousal. You come out the other side, the hypoarousal. So we either become hypervigilant or we start to shut down. Okay. So what I would talk about is, and this is more on an emotional level, trying to, if you will, increase that emotional bandwidth so we can tolerate more distress. Our tolerance for distress starts to increase. There are other ways of looking at it, increasing our capacity, being honest with ourselves, recognizing there's some things we cannot do, we cannot change, looking for the right kind of help and support for the things we can't manage ourselves. So yeah, the window of tolerance, it's I wouldn't say it's a new term, but it's not a term I would often use, but I do get the concept. Anne, I found your site a few weeks ago. You're so informative and delivery is spot on. Thank you so much. I don't sound as if I make this up as I go along. Sure, I don't. I just have a few bullet points. The rest of it's all waffle. I'm glad you find it helpful. Thank you. Screen looks blurry. Not sure why that is. It could be something to do with the Wi-Fi. I live pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The Wi-Fi is awful. It's not ideal for live streams. If you can hear me, so much the better. That's fair enough. I'm not much to look at. You're not missing much. Sounds like resiliency. Yes, it is. It's again, you think of resilience. It's not just our ability to bounce back, but it's our ability to navigate things, to navigate problems, obstacles, things like that. We also only have so much capacity. We can only take so much. We can only deal with so much. So as resilient as we can be, we are still going to get tired. We are still going to get overwhelmed. We are still going to come out of our window of tolerance. Our resiliency, I believe, is how we deal with that, and sometimes how we get back into the window of tolerance. Let's see, where are we? Pathology. Let's share some of these questions. Chronic anxiety, heard that. Yeah, chronic anxiety is just when it's ongoing. Someone is feeling anxious, but yeah, there could be something going on with them. There could be some kind of, they're predisposed to feel anxious. Different things could have happened to them, which increases their anxiety. Or what can happen is someone can be in an anxiety-provoking situation or environment, just like someone can be in a depressive environment. Sometimes the environment or the situation we're in can affect our mood. It can make us angry. It can lead us into a constant state of stress, worry, fear, anger, things like that. So that's, whenever you're talking about chronic, that's generally what I believe it means. It's either someone is predisposed because of maybe what's going on with them or what they've been through, or it could well be the situation or the environment they're in is bringing this up in them. Okay. Too confused. Afterwards, you feel numb, lacking in empathy, indifference, like a state of nothingness. That would be the hypovigilance. I think that's whenever we just feel so overwhelmed, it's like we have no more energy to deal with it. It's like almost like we're giving into it, but we just want to hide from it. We want it to go away. Where are we? Feeling triggered because something reminds us of past abuse, that's a big one. Yes, no, you're right. And it's like I said earlier on, what the trigger is, it brings up an emotional memory. We remember how it felt. And whenever we remember how it felt, we can sometimes feel as if we're right back in that situation. We can feel as if we are, or yesterday, that threat from yesterday, that situation from yesterday is present right here and now. Even though it might be a different person, it might be a different situation, it might be a different environment. It's the emotional memory that leads us to believe we're going through the same thing again. Now, sometimes we might be going through the same thing again, but we're not going through the same thing again as the same person, because we now have more information, we now have more experience, we're maybe a little older, whatever it happens to be. We also have a good idea of what might not work. So we know to rule that out. We can maybe try something else. Something I talked about again, previous live stream, about updating our memories, looking at ourselves, where we are today, how we are today, with what we have today, not judging ourselves, our past selves, through the eyes of the person we are today, with today's wisdom and experience. So what we can do is, when the trigger comes, it reminds us, it's the emotional reminder, and it might be unpleasant. It's not for me or anyone else to say it shouldn't be, not at all. It might be unpleasant, but it informs us. It doesn't necessarily make the decision for us. We recognize yesterday's situation is yesterday. This might look the same, it might feel the same, but it is different, and we are perhaps a little wiser, a little more equipped. While yet still today. Thank you so much. That is very generous of you, very kind. Thank you. That's really nice of you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. People are talking about being all over the globe. This is the thing that blows me away about YouTube. I'm talking to people in parts of the world I've never been to, probably never will get to. I'm not just talking to people down the road from me. It blows me away that there are people listening to me now. I mean, this is almost 10 to 9 on a Sunday night. I could be talking to someone in part of the world, and it's maybe their breakfast time or something. That really blows my head away. Anne's asking, I wonder if being highly agreeable makes a person more prone to being pushed outside of one's window of tolerance. And that is an absolutely fantastic question. Being highly agreeable, getting pushed outside of your window of tolerance. Think about what I was saying earlier about having the healthy boundaries. Absolutely. With healthy boundaries, it has been said that sometimes we need to learn to be a bit more disagreeable. I believe we can learn to disagree without being disagreeable. I think being overly disagreeable is not necessarily a good thing. Sometimes we have to be. It depends on the situation. But I think we can learn to disagree without being overly disagreeable. We do not necessarily lose our manners. We don't necessarily lose our empathy and things like that. We can be assertive without being aggressive. Being overly agreeable, you will find in life there are people who will appreciate that in you. They'll think that's a wonderful quality. But then you will find other people who will take advantage of that, because even if you say no, it's like they keep on at you because they know you're going to back down. When we do that, we put ourselves under more strain, under more stress, and yes, we can come out of our window of tolerance. So yeah, being a little more assertive, being able to disagree without being overly disagreeable, I think that can be a really healthy thing, and that can keep us within. Now, we don't necessarily like to disappoint people. We don't necessarily like to hurt their feelings. We don't like to let them down. That's not a nice feeling, because we don't like it when it happens to us. And I think that's one of the reasons why we can be too agreeable. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I know the way I normally phrase this, I'm not sure how this is going to come across. When we let someone down, we may disappoint them. The thing about disappointment is, to the best of my knowledge, it's not fatal. People generally get over it. They tend to get over it quite quickly. They'll get over it by the time they've hung up the phone. They'll get over it by the time they've closed the door. I think when we worry so much about how others feel and what they think, I think we're holding on to that as if that's something we've caused. Now, if we're being overly disagreeable, then perhaps it is something we've caused. But if we're just disagreeing, then we do not necessarily own their feelings. We're not responsible for them. We can care about them, but we don't have to care for them. There is a difference. So that was a really good point. That was a very good question. Thank you for that. I'm sitting listening to you. I'm listening to you from Michigan, but it feels like I'm sitting here with a sympathetic friend. Thank you. You're welcome. Again, I'm glad you find it helpful. That's really nice. Thank you. Build up of resentment from too much people pleasing. Yeah, that's another really good point about of our window of tolerance. The resentment we build up with too much people pleasing. When we're people pleasing, it's like we're putting their needs, their feelings before our own. It's like they're much more important than us. Remember what I said, we can disagree without being overly disagreeable. We can say no without being rude about it, without being horrible about it. When we do give in to people, when we continue, it's nothing wrong with our changing our minds, by the way, and deciding to help someone out. But when we continually do that, we can experience resentment. Now, everybody's different, but I would speculate that a lot of that resentment is the resentment we feel towards ourselves for not saying no, for not standing up for ourselves, for not allowing that person to go and do their own thing without us having to help them or do it for them. I think as much as that resentment can be for the situation or even the other person, because they keep pushing buttons, they keep crossing boundaries, I think sometimes that resentment is on ourselves. And when we turn things inwards, I think that's when we go into the hypoarousal state. That's when we start to shut down. That's when we start to go into a low mood and so on. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Darren. You're welcome. All people saying thank you. You're very welcome. The important thing is you do find something from this. Adequate sleep is important. Yep, absolutely. As I said, some people can get away with 5, 4, 5, maybe 6 hours, but they do feel refreshed. They feel they've rested. Other people might sleep 9, 10 hours, but they don't feel refreshed when they get up in the morning. So it's having a healthy kind of sleep. Okay. Reminds me of how the human body's immune system works. Allergic reactions when the threshold gets overwhelmed. T cells lose their advantage due to the onslaught. Yeah, yeah. The body. There is a book about how the body keeps the score. Yeah, we do feel things physically. Even at its simplest level, we know when we're nervous because we have butterflies in our stomach. We know when we're angry because we're agitated. We cannot sit still. We have a lot of energy. We look down and our knuckles are white. We do feel things physically, and it's worth paying attention to those physical reactions to things. Again, constant stress, we get things like knots in our stomach. Yeah. Enjoy listening to your chat, suggest things to improve your life. Have struggled with anger issues, have PTSD. Your calmness really helps to remain more grounded. You're an excellent shrink. I'm not a shrink, but that's okay. I don't know. What is a shrink? Psychiatrist? I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a counselor. I'm a therapist, if you will. But again, the important thing is you find it helpful. The things that I talk about in the live streams are things that you might not listen to every word. There might not be every single thing I say, but even if there's just one thing, just one little nugget, if you just get even out of an hour-long thing, you just get one sentence that you find helpful, then so much the better. I'm glad you find it helpful. Let me see. PDS. Hilarious that the pup's name is Freud. Well, yeah. If I told you the secret behind that, when I got the dog, when I got the pup, I was thinking of a name, and the reason why I decided to call him Freud is not just because I thought it's a funny name. for a dog anyway. It really annoys people. People think it's the most pretentious name a therapist could have for their dog, and I just get a kick out of that. Maybe that's my narcissism, who knows? But I just find that very funny. And it's funny, the name does not suit him. It really doesn't, because he is so full of energy. He's so playful. He does the silliest, craziest things. He is a dog that completely lacks self-awareness. He doesn't know he's a Cocker Spaniel, but he doesn't know he's a Cocker Spaniel. He still thinks he's a pup. He still thinks he can get into small places and he can do things. And my goodness, just no self-awareness. He's hilarious, but he's great company. I love him to bits. Pets are amazing. Yes, they are. The unconditional love. You're right. The best for unconditional love. Yeah. The thing I find about dogs, and I've found this my whole life, I grew up, we always had dogs at home when I was growing up, and then I had a dog sadly died a few years ago. Dogs, I've noticed dogs always seem to know your mood. There's something incredible about that. You know, even Freud knows when I need a walk. He knows when I need to play. You know, he will come over to me with his rubber bone or his rubber chicken or something. He knows when I'm to be left alone as well. He also knows when I'm eating. He never seems to miss that. That's funny. But yeah, they always seem to know your mood. I think that's something incredible about them. He knows when to play, but he knows when to just lie down on the sofa beside me and do nothing. You know, he just seems to get it. Happy songs, the song Happiness by Alexi Jordan. Fun for dancing in the office and a mood booster. It's good to have a song. There's some songs I listen to. I listen to different songs for different things, different moods. I mean, whenever I'm feeling a lot of energy, I like to listen to What's the Frequency, Kenneth by REM. Other times when I'm feeling a bit melancholy, I like to listen to On Every Street by Dire Straits. I just love the guitar at the end of that. Yeah, having a song, a particular song for particular moods is really, really good. Let me see, where are we? More soon understand this. Thorn, I've never felt more seen and understood than hearing all of this. I'm sitting on my couch sobbing. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Seen 6 different therapists over 5 years. I needed this. That was a very brave and honest thing to say. Again, I'm just glad you're getting something from it. If you do feel a little bit informed, I'm a big believer in knowledge is power, which is why I said when you recognize coming out of your window of tolerance, that's a good place to start. That awareness can help you to do whatever it is you need to get back into it. Okay, sending Lady Campion. Advice, I'll have to go back and watch the beginning of this. I don't often do this, but I'm going to give a shout out. If anybody hasn't already, listen to Lady Campion's channel. It is fantastic. It is the most amazing voice I've ever heard. She has, wow. Do you know what? Listen to it for yourself and make your own mind up. Do you know what? She should have a massive channel by now. It's her singing is fantastic. Don't often do shout outs, but there you go. You're welcome. Well, yeah, a lot of people saying thank you, and it is good. I'm glad you're finding them helpful. Realizing I have a chronic illness and being diagnosed with that and ADHD, then taking medication to manage this has seriously increased my patience with myself. It's good to know. Increased your patience with yourself. Again, whenever we do that, we can cut ourselves a bit of slack. No, we're not giving ourselves a get out of jail free card, but what we're not going to do is we're not going to constantly punish ourselves. And I think that's an important thing. A little bit of self-compassion. People talk about self-care. Yes, self-compassion, I think, is very important as well. We can be stern with ourselves. We can be hard on ourselves, but we can be gentle at the same time. We're not giving ourselves a get out of jail free card, but what we are doing is we're encouraging ourselves and we're motivating ourselves. Okay. Okay. And I think I've come to pretty much the end. Okay. People talking about movies at the end. Austin Powers. Funny, I never really Austin Powers. I always thought was kind of, yeah. There is humor in it. It's kind of weird. It is good movies, and it is my kind of humor. That strange kind of humor. No, it was for me. It was always Doctor Evil. He was the funny one. Doctor Evil. I could just watch movies with him in it. He's just so bizarre. He's just craziest villain ever. Um, so listen, everybody, I've come to the end of this evening. That was me talking about the window of tolerance, how we operate within it, what happens when we come out of it, the hyperarousal, the hypoarousal, some of the things that can bring us out of it, some of the things that can trigger us, that can push us out of it, but also some ways to, again, whatever the term is, whether you want to increase it, get yourself back into it, improve it, whatever the term is. So again, I'm glad that you found something helpful in that. Tomorrow, I have a video coming out at 6 o'clock, and tomorrow I'm going to be talking about, what was I talking about again? Yes, see, my mind goes all over the place. I'm going to be talking about learned helplessness. Okay, a couple of questions come up, and they're from a long time ago, so I apologize. I'm just getting to it now. Looking at learned helplessness, the different kinds of learned helplessness, and how do people learn or believe that they're helpless. I'm going to look at the different kinds. I'm going to look at the different ways it can manifest, and look at some of the different signs of it, where it can come from, and things like that. So hopefully there'll be something useful in that. Again, if you're looking for ideas to help manage learned helplessness, again, look at some of the live streams. What I've noticed this, and I've talked with this to another YouTuber that I will be collaborating with soon. The videos I make are more informative about different things, where they come from, what the behaviors are like, relationships, things like that. It's the live streams I prefer to talk about, techniques, the theory behind it, ways to help yourself. So yeah, it's kind of they kind of just dovetail nicely into each other, don't you think? One's about the actual subject, and the other is about maybe how to deal with it. So until next, oh, and I should forget, before I forget, I should say as well, my next live stream is going to be on a Wednesday night, 10 days time. And I'm going to be talking with Dr. Ruth Ann Harper. We're going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be, she has a lot of experience with relationships, personality disorders, things like that. We're going to be discussing those things together. We're going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be talking about the dynamics in relationships, when relationships work, when they don't. We're going to be talking about different personalities. We're going to be talking about toxic behaviors, narcissism, things like that. We're also going to be taking questions live from you. What I will ask, and I'm going to put this up, I would like, if it's okay, please submit questions beforehand so that we know what the sort of things you would like us to talk about. But we'll also be taking questions live on the night, the both of us. So again, thanks for joining me. As always, I'm glad you found this helpful. And until next time, thanks for watching.